Silas, CJ, thank you both so much for coming out. Great to have you here today.
Dude, it's awesome to be here. Super stoked.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, it's sweet that two of our worshipers and worship leaders at our church can speak into such an important topic. And why don't we start just by you two sharing. The both of you have been leading worship off and on for years. And when did this love for worship and participating in leading worship actually start for the two of you?
Yeah. You want to start?
Sure. I guess for me it started in 2008. I have this weird kind of story with my relationship with music. And so grew up doing a lot of musical stuff. There was a point though where I felt this tension between performance and just wanting to do something that I loved. I wasn't crazy about being put out there all the time to just perform and to do really great. So I quit music for a while, but it was worship music that actually brought me back. And I can see the Lord's hand in that, how he was teaching me already in like elementary school that he had given me music as like a means of worship and that it didn't need to be used as a show necessarily. There's nothing wrong with performance, like music and stuff, but it just wasn't me. And so in 2008, I went on a missions trip and yeah, I sat at the back, I had a guitar and it wasn't plugged in and I was just feeling, whether or not it was like safe to just play along with this music or if it would be me falling back into that weird performance thing. But then that was when I felt like God was saying to me, like, no, like you don't have to do this for anybody but me. And I was like, whoa, that's so freeing because I love to worship you and I can do that with this. And so grade 8 me was just suddenly super stoked and I just wanted more of it. So I started listening to a bunch of worship music, got involved on the team, and it's just grown since then through a lot of amazing opportunities through Willingdon Church, so yeah.
That's incredible. Grade 8 is when you had that experience. So you're like 13 years old.
Probably, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing
awesome.
that. Yeah. How about you,
I think
Silas?
I was still eating dirt at 13.
You were what?
Eating dirt at 13.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were smoking dirt.
That's rough. No.
That's pretty intense. I don't know.
It's fun.
Anyways.
I was fortunate to grow up in the church, and I was involved in music pretty early on. I started playing piano super young, just typical Chinese kid. I think I was like a 5 when I started piano lessons. And in doing so, my piano teachers were like music people at the church. And so it was just like an easy, hey, you're gonna play for the choir, you're gonna play for all this stuff growing up. And so I guess like for me, that music, church connection and like doing stuff, that's all I've ever kind of known. And so I kept playing music, kept doing, being involved with stuff like that until I think I was probably, early 20s, maybe 18, 19, where due to some circumstances, the church needed someone to help kind of start leading worship. And then so they asked if I'd do it just because I've been doing it for so long. And I was like, yeah, sure. But at that point, I began like, okay, like what does that actually mean to worship lead and stuff like that? And so that's when I kind of really started diving, okay, what does it actually mean to worship? What does it actually mean to do this? Not just, again, in a church context, we'll talk a little bit later, but in church context, but even in my own life, like what does it actually mean to do that, right? And so that's kind of what sort of began the journey and kind of, I guess if you will, opening my eyes to what it is. And I'm like, this is awesome, this makes sense, right? And so, yeah, a little bit later in life, I don't know, but we got there.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, that's sweet, thank you. So in the church, we know that worship is typically seen as kind of that portion of a weekend service that we play music and sing praise to God. And so is that kind of accurate to view worship like that? Or would you two say that there's more to it or worship might even be different?
Yeah, I think it's a common actually misconception. And that's kind of like what I meant by when I first started kind of diving into, okay, what does it actually mean to worship, right? Because I think, worship as a whole isn't necessarily, I guess, held to like just music, and it can't be. Like even if you define the word worship in a dictionary or whatever, right? It's kind of, I guess, ascribing greatness or like valuing something, whether that's God or anything else, right? And you can do that through spending time through all these other things that like isn't necessarily music, right? You can worship your phone, you can worship social media, but you're not singing to it, right? And so I think even just by looking at that and understanding that, it's like, okay, then it's got to be something more when the Bible talks about it, right? So I do think that's very incorrect when people kind of hold that kind of very narrow understanding of what worship is, and it's just like, oh, it's a Sunday morning singing, right? And so,
yeah.
Cool.
CJ, different thoughts, same thoughts?
No, I agree. Worship and music are not synonymous, but music is I don't know if it's one of the most powerful ways of worshiping God, but it is super powerful. Like it's in scripture everywhere, make a joyful noise, clash of cymbals, sing a new song. And so I get why people are just super stoked on Sunday mornings to come, because you're with a bunch of people who are singing their hearts out to Jesus. And for them, that's how they experience that worshipful connection, perhaps, with God. But yeah, to keep it to just that, I think it's just not enough. Like, we were created as worshipful beings to worship our Creator. And if that's all it is, then we've missed out on so much, really. Because God is in more than just music. Like, worship is anything that you do to give glory, to show recognition, or to recognize something as greater, right? And worth, I guess, investing in. I don't really know. I feel like you described it just fine. But I don't know. Another example of worship could be if you love being outdoors, right? If you just go for a walk and you see God's creation and your heart is like, wow, God, like, this is incredible. This is you. That's worship. Or maybe if you're in school and you're studying, and this is something that actually Student Ministries has taught me a lot about. You can study as worship, because studying could be, God is giving you the tools, the knowledge for something that could be used for His glory later. So why not, in this time of studying and whatnot, say, God, I give this to you as an act of worship, because I want this to glorify you somehow. Whether it be my effort that I put in, not by my own strength, but in depending on you, like, that can be worship too. I don't know if that's a tangent, but to go back to your question, like in the church, it's common, to think of it as just in the service, but it's so much more.
I think it's like kind of what you touched on too. It's understandable why it's so popular and people kind of view it that way. I mean, outside of the culture and the language and stuff, I mean, music has this ability to kind of speak to us in ways other than just our brain, right? I think it's a wonderful gift that we've been given, like, by God, right? This ability to speak to our souls, you could say, right? And
our emotions, our spiritual selves.
And so in that sense, music has just this incredible power behind it. And beyond that, I mean, you think about the things that we do as, like, within a church service, if you will, like a gathering, right? I think music is one of those things that people can thoroughly enjoy who are in the church and also outside the church in the secular world. So it's an easy connection to make, right? Not everyone's going to enjoy preaching or teaching. Not everyone even knows what prayer is, right? But everyone kind of knows what music is. And so there's this huge, I guess, connect with outside the church and non-Christians in the secular world and inside the church world. And so it's kind of everywhere, and so it's very prevalent in everything that we do, right? And so I think it's easy to give it a lot of weight. Not that it shouldn't, but yeah, kind of like what we said.
Yeah. Oh, I know I'm definitely guilty of calling our musical portion of a gathering the worship, time of worship, as if, like, we're not going to be worshiping before or after. Okay, it's worship time. Okay, now it's teaching time or prayer or whatever. So that kind of raises the question, I guess, is worship an activity? Is the heart posture? Like, how can we be worshiping, watching the announcements in a church service? Or how can we be worshiping as we're walking to our cars after a gathering and driving home? Like, is it an activity or is it a heart posture?
Well, I think that's what I was trying to describe earlier in terms of doing a bunch of different things and those being worshipful things, because it depends on your heart posture. It depends on what the intention is behind those things. Worship is a lifestyle. It's never supposed to be just a set time and place necessarily. Like, it's good for you sometimes to set aside a time and place to focus and to engage in something worshipful. Like, that's a really good thing, to rid yourself of distractions and like dedicate that time to the Lord. But to think that's where it can only happen, I would disagree with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think definitely worship is, I've always viewed it as kind of an internal understanding that then manifests itself in some external expression, right? And so you can't get to the outward, be it singing, be it whatever other form of worship. I mean, if that's what most people relate to, let's just, for sake of argument, talk about singing, talk about music, right? If there's no true understanding and belief on the inside of the worth of God, right? What's been done on the cross, like what that entire gospel story truly means, right? Then this outward stuff doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus even says that, right? When you say the other things with your lips, but your heart's not there, then like it's nothing, right? And so I think very much with that in mind, right? And it's just internal, call it heart posture, just call it understanding, whatever you will, of the worth and value of God and everything, be it like CJ was saying, be it walking in nature and appreciating who God is and just the beauty of his creation, the createdness of God, right? The playfulness, the joyfulness of God and being in it, right? Be it in your studies, be it in how you make food and how you enjoy food, be it in your times of quiet, right? You know, when you're just silent and you're just kind of with God, right? You're choosing to spend time with him, right? You are that time and that, you know, just being in his presence, you're giving value to that. You're giving value to him, right? You're sacrificing time for something else. I think that's because of the internal thing, that external expression can really be anything, as long as you understand what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think I want to add to that, you mentioned the word sacrifice. Maybe it's because worship is connected to music so much, where you go into the sanctuary and it just feels really good. You know, it's fun, you get kind of caught up in the moment maybe, but worship is not meant to be something that serves you. It's something meant as an offering to God. And so if you attend a service, I'm just going to use the music as the longer example for this. If you go and you just want to get something from it, then I think that falls flat of what worship really is. When it should, like what Silas said, it should be an act of reverence and recognition to who the Lord is. Like, Jesus died and rose again. For me, his sacrifice is what covers me, what makes me righteous. I cannot help but, respond in a way that's like, it's not me, God, it's you. Like, that should be the attitude behind worship every time.
Yeah, that's great comment. Actually, good segue into the next question, because musical worship is a huge part of different church gatherings and how they express themselves and what they kind of rally around. And so there's so many different styles that are out there. Things that date centuries back, things that are more popular in the, different generations, whether it's 3 generations ago or contemporary today. And churches even split, like churches divide over these style preferences. So it also begs the question, if worship is this sacrifice, or if that's at least a component of worship, how important is style and preference to worship music when someone is looking for a church community to be a part of? If they go somewhere and the music just does not resonate with them on an emotional level or even spiritual level, if we can go there, versus one that they just get sucked right into it and they love that experience, like, how important is that for choosing a church community?
It's definitely important. I don't think it should be ignored, right? There is, again, that connection with music that people, I would argue, need, right? I know not everyone necessarily understands or speaks the language of music, but like you said, like we talked about earlier, there is a kind of transcendent beyond the brain kind of understanding of music and how it speaks to you. But I think as a whole, like yes, I think there is a lot of weight put on the music portion of worship in a service, in a church. But there are so many other things involved. I mean, even when you look at, and I'm sure, through all these interviews you've been talking about what the church is and stuff like that, there is so much more to church than just the music, right? And why we gather, right? Something I think powerful happens when people gather and we sing together and we gather as a community and we do stuff, right? But that's not just singing, right? That's not just music, right? You talk about praying together, you talk about learning together and studying and growing and breaking bread and all this other stuff, right? All forms of worship, right? But not just the music. Now, I think as CJ mentioned before, it's a lot of the stuff, it shouldn't be self-serving, right? Yeah, like go and be filled, right? And enjoy it and be a part of it. But the end goal isn't necessary for you, right? So when you come and you go into a community and you just want to love on the community, yeah, it's okay if the music isn't your favorite, but if you come in with the attitude of there are other ways I can worship, not just at church, but even during the week, where I can worship in my own way with the music and stuff. But when I come to church, I'm actually here to kind of serve them and be with them and be in community with them, right? And if that's the case, yeah, music's there, but there's so many other things, right? And so it's like I might not love, this genre. I might not love these old hymns, but I know that for them, the people that I'm here with, the people I care about, my community, it's incredible for them, and they're in it and they're worshiping hard and they're loving it, right? Then I'm like, I'm okay, right? That I'm in this community and I might not love it on Sunday morning, but what I love is that my fellow brother, my fellow sister is having an awesome moment right now, if that kind of makes sense, right? So.
Yeah. To add to that, I remember what Daryl Johnson said. We went to the Worship Central conference last year, and he was talking about older forms of worship or like preferences and styles versus modern day church things. And you know how like concerts nowadays, it's like smoke and lights and it's dark and it's loud, but that really speaks to the younger person, right? Like it's a whole experience for them that they can really engage in versus stained glass, like in a more traditional setting, hymns, the organ, right? That speaks to a different person, right? I think if we get caught up in saying one is more worshipful than the other, I think it gets risky because what's really important is that like you're worshiping, right? So like style is important, but understanding the theology of what worship is far more important. You should be able to connect in a way that makes sense to you. Like there are different temperaments, I suppose, when it comes to worshiping God. But like, I guess, I think it's fine if you walk into a church and it's just, you're not connecting at all. Oftentimes the music is the first thing it's like first impressions, right? I think it's okay to be like, maybe not here. Because it is important. If you're going to put roots down in a church community, you should be able to do so in a way that just makes sense overall. But don't just like write it off and don't give it a chance. I would take it to the Lord to be like, God, is this where you actually want me to be? Is this the family that I am to be part of, to serve you, to glorify you? And I think if you just approach it that way, God could open up some really cool doors that you might not have considered if you just left it at like, oh, the first song wasn't my thing and peace out. Like I wouldn't do that, so.
Yeah. What I'm kind of gathering from what the two of you said is basically, when choosing a church community, it's about the community. Like it's not so much about the style or the preference. As much as those things have value, it's not to say that they're irrelevant, but they are secondary at best as far as like, do you love the people? Do you want to do life with them? Do you want to serve with them? Which also raises the question, like, as church communities, what should we be looking to invite people in? Should it be the style of what we present, or should it actually be how we connect with them and how we love them and how we, present relationships that they can be a part of? So that's a great perspective that you guys shared. Cool. Okay, moving on to the next question, because I just want to get all that I can out of you guys while I have you here. So when it comes to, I kind of want to jump ahead a bit, current expressions of worship that you see in the church, particularly, as you mentioned, CJ, for the younger generation, kind of things that are resonating with them and what's exciting about young people worshiping Jesus that you've seen. What are you looking forward to in the future as far as church worship and how it might look different than what we currently see in kind of the, Western church of, I guess, BC, but, maybe to speak more broadly, North America?
I think one thing I'm really excited about is just in terms of this next generation, like having a voice is really important, right, to them, and it is. I think, and what's going to come out of that is there's going to be, I'm hoping, years and years of just really awesome songs coming from the church, but not just like the greater church, because that's always going to happen, but I think very specific to a person's home church, where a song can come from them that represents the church and whatever the church is going through, right? I think that's going to be awesome, and along with that, just future worship leaders. I think, again, I think the reason we're at a point now where we have to talk about these things of what music is in church and stuff like that is it's been treated and kind of viewed a certain way for generations, right? And I think as we're starting to kind of get a better understanding, I think we can better articulate it to the next generation, right? Again, not to say that mistakes were made, but just, again, being able to shift that focus of, okay, what is the greater picture of what worship is? So I think those are things that are going to be really awesome for the next generation.
Yeah, that's sweet. I like that thought of seeing a lot more kind of organic, grassroots, like worship coming from local communities. It's not so much advertised for the masses, like trying to get a one-hit Christian wonder, but actually just like, no, this was a song that rewrote in this season that served its purpose then, and we're writing new ones for future seasons. It's not like, oh, what will be the next hit for the decade? The Good Father of 2020, 2030.
Good Father.
That's a great song, though. Not smashing Pat Barrett or Chris Tomlin. Well done. Love that song. But, like, what are we trying to create with worship? And that sounds really cool. Yeah. CJ, what are your thoughts?
I think when it comes to the future generation, I don't know if I sound like a broken record saying it, but I just pray that we as current leaders would do a good job in teaching the theology of worship, because I would want them, upcoming leaders, to just take it and discern with the Holy Spirit what worship should look like for their generation, for the ones after that. Because that's like what we are trying to do all the time. I think at Willingdon, there's this phrase, I don't know if anyone says it, but I've just heard it a lot, like working here. It's like cradle to grave. That at Willingdon we have.
There's a DMX movie called Cradle to the Grave, but that's dating myself and not appropriate for our viewers. I'm sorry. Anyways, please go on.
Are we gonna cut that? Or I'm kidding.
No, just ignore what I said. We'll keep the camera rolling.
Okay. Cool.
Cradle to Grave.
Yeah, just Willingdon is just all age groups and so many different cultures. And so when we're planning something, that has to do with worship music, we really want to make sure that it's not just because, for example, I happen to be a younger person, I might drift more towards certain genres and stuff, but you really have to look at like, what church community am I part of? And like what Silas was saying earlier, it's like, what would actually serve them? Like obviously putting the Lord first, like what is glorifying to God, but your job as a worship leader is to, provide things, how should I say this, that just makes sense for people to encounter the living God, I'd say. And so...
Like facilitating people, like an encounter with God trying to help create, whether it's the avenue or the atmosphere or whatever, that people can experience God's presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard recently that the role of a worship leader is to be aware of and engage in the presence of God, and for that to just be shared from what they do in the church. And I would just really hope, I don't know if this is too big picture for your question in terms of what future generations of worship might look like, but yeah, if we just have an understanding of the theology and we know that style is important but doesn't dictate necessarily, then I'm not worried about whatever they do. You know, they'll find their own form of stained glass, right?
Yeah, cool. No, thanks for sharing that. So I think a lot of our conversations so far has revolved around music, which makes sense because you are both musicians, and that's sort of the context in which you've led worship for most of your experience. But you also mentioned that worship isn't just music. Music's a powerful form of worship, but it's not all there is. So then for people in the church, maybe people like me who aren't as musically gifted, but working on it. We'll have to start practicing again. We'll get there, but currently not. How can we contribute to worship in the church and not just have worship be this select group of musicians, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's the worship team or worship people, worship community, as if non-musicians don't really have anything to offer that. Could you guys speak into ways that us non-musically talented folk can actually contribute?
Yeah. I think when you understand that God has created you in a certain way with certain gifts, when you know what those are, they're meant to bless others and to serve Him. And so if you find a way to engage in the church that uses those gifts, that's worship. Straight up. If you are...
Well, is it worship, or is it can be worship?
Oh, it can be worship.
Because I've done a lot of stuff for the church that has not been worshipful, and it's just been me burning myself out. Just straight up honesty.
Okay, thanks for catching that. That's a good point.
No, that's just me, though. That's my own issues. Getting exposed.
No, I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability. No, but you're right. It is about the intention of using those gifts for the sake of a worshipful offering. So when you have that mindset, I don't know, maybe example of food. If you love cooking and that's worshipful to you, you have the gift of hospitality. At least at Willingdon, when we were open with in-person things, we had a cafe. You could come and help set up the coffee station, meet with people in the cafe, serve food. That has the potential to be super worshipful.
Totally.
And there's no music in that.
Having young adults, pastors over for dinner, maybe. But yeah, keep going. Yeah, this is good. This is good.
I mean, yes. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a key kind of thing about that too is just the idea of actually sharing that gift with people and serving them and allowing, for instance, food again, because we
love food.
Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Food's great.
But if the creation of food, if you actually making something with your hands is worshipful for you, right? And then you get to share that with someone and them experiencing it, be it the community, be it whatever. But even as you talk about it, as we share with them, oh, I created this because I'm a creator because God is a creator, and all this artistic stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Then in sharing that with the people in the gathering of eating together, that is worshipful for them. That can be worshipful for them.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think, again, using your gifts, whatever, if it's not music, whatever it may be, but using it for again, going back to that community, that church, that family of serving them, right? Of allowing them to be okay, I'm using my gift to somehow help you have a worshipful experience. Mm-hmm. Be that making food, be that music, be that praying for someone.
Yeah. No, that's sweet. And I love the word you used, CJ. You talked about intentionality, where I think that, so much you said that going for a walk, going into nature and stuff can be worship, but it also can not be worship, for me, I love to exercise and it makes me feel so good, but it's not always done worshipfully to God. Sometimes I worship other idols with my exercise. And I've even led exercise programs at like Bible camp and stuff for families, which sometimes it was an act of worship. Let's go honor God with our bodies. But other times it was just, me doing what I had to do, and I signed up to lead it, so I got to lead it. It's kind of like that. But with intentionality, it's almost like all things can become an overflow of worship to God. But that takes some deep inner work.
And I think too, like, again, as we talk about the greater picture of the church and community, I think that's part of the reason why it's so important. Because there are going to be people, like, these things that we just love doing, right, that are natural to us, like we can sometimes forget, right? Like, you lose that intentionality of worship, right? And so having that community around you, a space where someone can be like, hey, like, remember why you're doing it, is having that kind of heart check from time to time, right? Because everyone's got their blind spots.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw a curveball at you guys, because I enjoy doing that sometimes. Speaking of the next generation, is there anything about how you see the church, again, broadly speaking, I know there's so many diverse expressions, but we'll just try to be broad here, how the church currently leads in worship that is kind of missing the next generation? Or do you think it's kind of all good to go and just kind of keep on rolling and focus on other things?
I think sometimes we can fall into a trap of, I guess because we've been doing it for so long, like for ourselves, let's say an older generation, right? I'll speak for myself, because like,
Older generation?
Sure.
Wow.
You can call me an older generation.
Wise man.
I got to register for my vaccine like early on.
Whoa. Jealous.
But I think it's because I think we've been doing it for so long, right? I think sometimes we forget to pass that knowledge on to the next generation. Right? CJ mentioned teaching the theology and understanding what worship is, and so we kind of keep doing it, and we see it, and though our hearts are right and we understand, the next generation might not see that. They just see the external. Right? Because again, like, if it's really an internal thing and an external realization, like, we don't get to see the internal stuff. Right? So if you think of the next generation, when they see this stuff happening, it's like, okay, I see the external, but I don't see the internal. Right? Because it's tough, especially in a large community, like, let's say for Willingdon's sake, right? You can't talk. I mean, if you're extroverted enough, you can go up and talk to the people on stage, and you can get to hear their heart. That doesn't happen all the time. Right? And so I think it's easy to fall in the trap of just kind of doing this and seeing this external thing and then equating that to worship. Or potentially even worse, good worship. Right? And so I think it is important for us to kind of actually, like, intentionally talk about this stuff and educate people. And educate the next generation about, okay, what is worship? And stuff like that, right? And so I think that kind of answers your question. A little bit,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, honestly, I was going to say the same thing, and I'm not just saying that as a cop-out, but this younger generation is just online a lot more, and I just think about Instagram, how people just want to put their best out there, right? And again, using Willingdon as an example, like, we are on a platform, and of course you want it to look good, right? Because of various reasons.
Do you mind sharing? No, you don't have to go there.
I mean, you just want it to be your best, and that can be worshipful too, right? But if that's all they see and they don't hear the heart behind it, that's why moments like this, it's really important, so that way they see, I think firstly, at least for me, like, I'm human and I don't sing perfectly all the time. I am not the best musician. And I don't say that to be self-defeating, but I'm just saying, like, you don't have to be a certain thing that people see good worship as, And so I would hope that the upcoming generation can just lean into being real and being vulnerable and being okay with making mistakes, that it doesn't have to be perfect. I think we could all use those reminders, but I feel like social media just like makes it all the more necessary. So,
yeah, like makes it feel more necessary to be looking a certain way or appearing a certain way. Yeah, yeah, and not to denigrate the value of beauty and creativity and all that, and skill. Like those things are God-given gifts. They're great. However, some of the most impactful worship moments have been led by some of the most mediocre musicians that I've experienced, and I'm just like, wow, this is powerful. It's beautiful. I'm drawn in to focus on God alone, and I'm not saying that would be, counteracted with good skill, as in like a more skilled worship leader can't do that. But there's just something to say about almost the anointing, to use a weird Christian word that some Christians might understand. But there's something about that like giftedness of worship leading that isn't necessarily tied to skill per se. I know that's a much deeper conversation as far as like, what's the bar? Yeah. I shouldn't be leading worship, musical worship on a stage. They'd be like, no one can worship now. Great. But like there is obviously more to it than just looking our best and sounding our best. And even like moments of worship that have not been tied to music. Maybe they've been in other experiences that are like more profound than what I've had in a musical setting. So like, yeah, there's definitely lots to say to the next generation about what worship is. What are we trying to become? Are you trying to have the next best voice for YouTube or Instagram or TikTok? And so that everyone flocks around you and says, look how great they are. Because all of a sudden we define worship excellence as musical talent.
I heard recently, I'm pretty sure it's Daryl Johnson too, showing up twice in this conversation, when he said it's not wrong that we want to be seen well.
Oh yeah.
Right, but what's more important is that we understand that God needs to be seen better than that. Right, in terms of whatever that may be it preaching, be it even praying, be it music, whatever expression that may be. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's just a kind of a slight shift in perspective. I think that's pretty rad. I think another thing too, just as kind of you guys were talking about the next generation stuff too, I think historically it just happens, not just in the church, but in the entire world, just that shift of the next generation, et cetera, right? Of just having an openness to understand how this next generation can worship. Right? I don't think we can write off. Again, just like they might not be able to see the hearts of the people on stage, we can't see their hearts unless we actually talk to them. We can't just write it off. Be like, oh, whatever you're doing is weird. I don't get it. Right?
I don't like that.
I don't like that. That can't be worship. Right?
Yeah.
But if we know that we've done our due diligence and we've talked to them and we've explained, okay, what is the heart of worship, and then that is their natural external expression, then I think we have to respect that and understand that and give them an opportunity to express themselves in that way.
Okay, question I have for that though. So for yourselves as kind of, primarily musical worship leaders in your context, if the next generation resonates more with a totally different genre than what you've experienced or even appreciated, is that something that you think, a worship leader should get acquainted with and become skilled at so that they can bless the next generation, even though you hate the genre? Maybe it's bluegrass. Let's just throw a wild example out there. You love bluegrass. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's abnormal to worship through bluegrass for our context. So for those, for that next generation, you're like, I'm not a huge fan of this genre, but they just want to worship God through it. Therefore, I'm going to do it. Is that okay? Or is that kind of inauthentic and you should just kind of do what you like, or hang up your hat and let the next person take the spot?
I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to understand it and get it, but also along with that, we talk about the next generation. I think one thing that's important is empowering them to do it themselves. Right? It's like, you speak this language. Let me give you a platform to do it. I might not be able to do it. You can, but as someone who's done it, as a worship leader, who's a little maybe further along in this walk of understanding what worship is, right? I can make sure that your heart's good. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I would see it. I mean, you should learn to do bluegrass. It's hard.
It'll make you a better musician.
Oh yeah.
Hands down. What do you think, CJ?
Well, I actually think about the mentors I've had over the years who might have done things differently, but they walked with me and they taught me about the heart of worship. And they just let me go and like do what was me. I think that was a big part of me growing as a worship leader, is doing something that was just me, like how God made me to be. And so when it comes to, well, I think this also raises the point where I don't have to be the worship leader for the next generation, like for forever. I don't think that's healthy. Like what Silas said, like we should be empowering constantly for people to be coming up, you know, and taking on those leadership opportunities to serve others. I think it's important to take a learning stance in everything. So to humble yourself and to learn about what works, what resonates with different kinds of people. But don't go against the grain of who God made you to be. Like that could become prideful because you feel like you have to be the one that makes it happen, right? And I don't think that's right.
Even though you don't know or like that genre, you need to lead it, so you better get good at it. Like you're saying, nah.
Yeah, like I'll never go on TikTok. It's just not who I am.
Right, that's fair.
Like,
I mean, never say never. Never say never.
No, I think I'm saying never.
Because the next one's going to ask after this interview, do you mind doing a TikTok for young adults? Ooh. So we'll talk. It's fine. We'll talk.
Is that the right demographic for TikTok?
Yeah.
I don't even know. But like,
we'll talk about it later.
Oh,
anyway,
no, you did not just do that.
I went there because I'm 28. I'm old.
Young adults pastor here, everybody. No. No, but like if I don't know if that's a weird example, but like if that is an avenue for people to engage in worship unto the Lord, sure. I'm gonna let them do it, not me.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's fair. And we do have to have open hands. Like obviously there's wisdom, there's boundaries, there's, you can't worship through, sin. But when there are things that we might not fully understand, it's like, how could you even worship God through this? Like, can you? It's like, well, guess we have to wait and see. We kind of just gotta, empower the next generation, love them, care for their hearts, like you said, Silas. Make sure that their hearts are oriented towards God, and see if maybe TikTok will be a great medium for them to worship God at some point.
I should have picked something else. I don't know.
It's the example at hand. No, that's great though. Thank you both for sharing that. One last question before we close out today. I wanted to hear what you both think about, considering we're talking about style, preference, generations. Sometimes I look back at how previous generations worshipped and style and order and all that, and I'm not a huge fan. Just saying, not a huge fan. So it's easy for me to say their worship sucked, or oh man, I don't even know if they were actually worshiping. It's just like, let's just move on. It's easy to become that prideful. What have you both seen in the previous generations that you think people like me, who easily look down at what once was, what can we appreciate about that, and maybe even not maintain, but just even acknowledge to appreciate of what previous generations have done with worship?
I think, again, this is kind of a personal thing. It's just being a person that grew up in the church, right? I know that there are, soft spots in my heart for these classic 90s hits. Would I enjoy them today? Yes and no.
Would you be excited to write it into your next worship set?
Yeah.
You're like, let's go, Michael W. Smith, drop it.
Hey man, he's still making bangers.
Still relevant.
I think.
Yeah. But I am thankful that I got to experience those growing up. Like, even if I don't like it now, like the truths that were sung, the truths that were spoken and expressed, like those are still resonating in my heart. And so I'm super grateful for that, for one. In terms of what's kind of been done and how it's done in the past, I think, again, you kind of talk to the next generation, them seeing the old, like us, the older generation on stage, right? It was kind of the same thing for myself. And until you actually sit down and you talk with this older generation, this older generation of worship leaders, and you hear their heart, right? And you get to talk to them, and not just as they share wisdom and stuff, because they've been there, they've done that. It might have been different, but they have done it, right? And they've experienced a lot. But when you get to actually hear their heart, you get to appreciate that, right? And you know that, okay, though I don't get it, I know that your heart was in an amazing place. And though, again, I don't get it, I've seen God use you in incredible ways as you led this church through worship, right? And so I think a big thing to learn to appreciate the previous stuff is actually sit down and talk to them, right? I think we have a lot to learn, but I think the biggest thing is sometimes when you have these conversations with older worship leaders, I'm like, man, I don't get why you do things like that. It sounds so lame. And it's like, oh, but your heart is like you want people to experience God, you want people to worship. You have such a great heart for this. Like, how can I not respect that?
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's sweet.
I think one of like the best things for me in my time as a worship leader has been talking to people who led worship in the past and just gleaning anything I can about how they led and served in their context. And so when I think about maybe what has been done in the past and I just didn't get it or I didn't like it, and people now might be like, that's not worshipful for me, like that's okay, but let's take a step back and appreciate the beauty of what was happening back then. Because guaranteed, those people probably think that you're weird in the way that you worship too. But again, like bridging the gap, have those conversations. What was the posture of your heart? Did you have the heart of worship? And again, like context really matters, you know, for how that actually plays out with where you are. So I guess if I'm talking to you and you're like, no thank you to what happened before, I would just challenge you actually to think about just what it meant and how it made sense back then. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great challenge. Thank you for challenging me,
You're welcome.
CJ. It's true though. I mean, at one point, Michael W. Smith and Vineyard worship music were cutting edge.
Vineyard.
And lots of churches were like, whoa, that's too far.
Yeah.
And now we're like, whoa, that's in the past. Like there's newer expressions that are different and crazier. I'm curious, like, do you think each generation naturally just kind of gets stuck in their generation? So it's kind of like the worship leader that was, 20 years old, however many decades ago, breaking new ground with Vineyard and Michael W. Smith as their primary role models, that kind of stays there and still does that same thing 30 years later. And we're like, okay, when are you going to move on and play some Maverick City music at some point?
Maverick.
Are we going to be that generation that 20 years from now, we're going to be playing Maverick City, Brandon Lake, like all these homies that we love, and 20 years younger than us, they're going to be like, guys, come on, get with the times. Or do you think that worship leaders, whatever age you're at, should look to adapt to the younger generation, kind of pick up what's trending with them, as insofar as they have the ability and desire to actually do it?
I think that's similar to the question of should I learn to do what the next generation is doing. I think it's always healthy to learn and appreciate it. Again, to actually do it, I think that's kind of a different thing.
Unless you're proficient at it.
Yeah.
It's not like you're a opera singer, become rapper, but actually it's all acoustic led, singing.
I think that right there is a huge part of it too, right? It's kind of, I think, do people get stuck? I think they can. I mean, it's just what you're comfortable with. It is the language that you speak, right? Because music, especially when we talk about music is 100% the language, right? And so you are most comfortable in a certain language. And I think that's okay, right? Do we force that on people? I think that's kind of where we run into some issues, and we try to force it on someone, is that this is the only way to do it, right? But I think having an openness to whatever is coming, I think is important. And I think, again, for me, again, broken record, right? I think talking to people, having those conversations, and knowing their heart, and like, okay, the heart's in a good place is a natural external thing. This is okay, right? This is going to serve the body in a greater way than me forcing my style on everyone is going to do. Right?
Yeah. That's good. CJ, any final word?
Can you repeat the question, actually?
Oh, yeah. Should we look to be adapting to the next generations, kind of whatever's new and trending, as you, or as we continue to age up and grow older, and if we still have the same style 20 years from now, is that okay to be kind of stuck in our generation's whatever's popular, or should we be looking to kind of adapt and kind of pick up new stuff as it becomes popular with the younger generations?
Right. Thanks. I agree there's a tendency to get stuck in your comfort zone. I think it makes sense. I try and pray against that like every day that we do our jobs. I think that's actually important, like teaching humility or just, being taught humility, really, because it's not just like everything comes from me to the next generation. Like, no, I need that wisdom from the past, from what the word says, in order to be, what's the word? I can't think of it right now, but just like the idea of discipleship, right? How it's like you're being discipled, you are discipling others. It's just this flow, right? And how it's not just you get stuck and like, I've achieved this level of discipleship. Fantastic. And then, I think it's the same with worship. Just having that heart of humility, teaching that heart of humility, and just having that flow, and how that will help you discern how to adapt, what to say yes to, what to say no to, right? And how that is all done under prayer or covered in prayer. And returning back to the word, again, theology of worship. I don't know if that answers the question. I think I got a bit lofty there, but
No, that's great. That's helpful.
I had another thought too as you were talking about that. I think one thing too is, how do I say this in a in a good way? I think it's good to allow the next generation to do their stuff, but at the same time, if we are the next generation, we can't forget about the people that came before us and the older generation that also needs Jesus, that also needs worship, that also needs music. Right? I think that's a healthy perspective from both sides, right? Of where, you talk about, again, as we grow older, let's say we're 20 years from now, right? The people that are our generation that are also 20 people who they might still resonate with how we do things. So we can't just completely ditch it. Like, we're not doing this anymore. We're just going to do what's popular in 20 years. It's like, yeah, be open to it, allow that to happen, but you can't forget about this older generation that also needs Jesus, right?
Yeah. Great.
Kind of a counter to what we sort of thought.
No, that's good. Yeah. Healthy respect and love for different generations. And clearly there's so much more that we could say about the topic. It's vast. There's a lot to it, not only just the musical side, but everything else on worship that we touched on. But I just want to say thank you both. I think this is a great starter for further conversations, just even as we look to pass along, whatever we've been able to learn to the next generation and to young adults as they watch this and think about for themselves, what does worship mean? And so thank you to both of you, CJ, Silas, for coming out and giving your time to do this.
Thank you for starting the conversation about that. Maybe not starting, but like
the first
having
person in
it.
history. It's I pride myself on that.
Well,
No, just kidding. Totally. Yeah.
That's awesome.